Yo, before we even get into the conversation, I gotta acknowledge you got one of the best radio voices I've ever heard.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I have an ongoing joke about, showing up in meetings and serving beard and baritone. It's like I got to
Oh,
give the people what they want. And I actually turned around and bought beardandbaritone.com just to make sure
you're
no one
lying.
takes it from me. Kid you not. We got a vision. We got a vision, yo.
Yo, it's funny. Like, I typically listen to the whole podcast episode and then find what the title is gonna be. Already got it. Dude, you should do like voiceovers for like Audible. Like, you should go pitch authors to like just read their books.
You're not the first person to say that to me. If I can squeeze another hour out of my 24, then we'll figure it out. That's the part I got to work on to make that happen.
I just, I just think you got to prioritize. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's funny. Like, I've gotten that too, but I always get offended because I'm just like, oh, word, I got a voice of radio, but what? I don't got a face for YouTube. Like, nobody tells me that. But you one of those. You might have both, bro. You might have both.
I appreciate you. Hermano. Listen, I'm here for it. From your lips all the way up. If this is what my calling is, then let's get these microphones popping.
I mean, that might be a future endeavor, but I've been excited to chat with you because, speaking of your calling, you've been in the tech game for a minute, and worked for like a few notable companies. So I'm really curious to get your experience in the topics that we talk about, which is professionalism versus authenticity. So let's start with the word authenticity. Such a buzzword, but when you think about it, what comes to mind for you? What does it mean to you?
Authenticity, I think, is pretty parallel with integrity. It's a matter of showing up and, making sure that what you think and what you say and what you do are aligned. But I think the matter of authenticity also requires an element of courage, right? When we think about particularly the topic at hand of showing up authentically in spaces where we aren't traditionally welcomed, right? Ooh, that's energía que tenemos que like really muster up to be able to show up that aligned. And so I think authenticity is an energy expenditure and a commitment to truth.
Wow. Courageous and an energy expenditure.
Yeah.
I'm curious for you, were you always courageous? And I'm thinking back, like, even growing up, like, would people describe you as a courageous child?
Wow. No. I was a nerdy kid. I was a bit of a loner. I was that kid who hung out in the New York Public Library because I was the only, gay, light-skinned boy in the projects. Everyone was coming up after me. So I found my refuge in books. And in those books, I was able to spend time far, far away from my physical environment, right? Getting immersed in faraway lands or different times. And books became my shield, right? And my shield, my armor, and everything in between. But you reminded me of a story, an incident when I was much younger. My dad really tried to push me to stand up for myself, right? Like, you can't go through life running to the library. You can't find refuge in these things. You've got to face these people head on. And there was an incident where I got pushed off the swings by these kids in the neighborhood, dropping the F-bomb because I was that little queer kid in the project, right? And I came back crying. And don't you know, my dad took the broom and he unscrewed, the broom from the stick. He gave me the stick and he said, "You go confront them and you get back on that swing." And that was the earliest instance that I can think of speaking up for myself and acting out of a place of, courage to make sure that I could get what I wanted, which was a seat on that swing, because I was there first.
Wow. And, here we are. Everyone's talking about a seat at the table. Look at you, just wanting to get a seat on the swing.
I just wanted to be a happy kid. It's a happy and safe kid like anyone else.
That's deep, man. And in particular, too, because, I think you talk about growing up in the projects and, you haven't necessarily disclosed where the projects are, but, we have similarities in that sense of like growing up in the projects of New York City. And
yeah.
I didn't grow up in the Bronx, but I went to high school, like not too far from where you grew up. Shout out to Cardinal Hayes, right? South Bronx.
That's what's up.
Tell me a little bit about what that was like growing up in the projects in the South Bronx. And also would love for you to get into, you referenced a few different times being that light-skinned queer boy, I think you mentioned, in there. What was that like too?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So for context, my
You're like,
family and
damn,
I,
we gonna start there. That's where
let's
we
go.
started.
I'm like, do I owe you a copay after this? This is how I usually get down with my therapist, right? No, I'm just kidding. So, not kidding about mental health, but like, but to take a step back, my family and I are from Puerto Rico. I was born on the island, and I like to say that I was abducted at a young age because, ooh, the food was good, the music was good, the people are pretty. You know what I mean? Why would you take me away from this place? So I was abducted and brought to the Bronx because my family wanted me to learn English and go to school. And we came from a very small town where, like, my mom didn't have access to education. She didn't have access to healthcare. She had to drive an hour to give birth to me. Right, like she went into labor
Wow.
and had to endure that. Right, that is the reality of the context of that. So, there was that dream of like, we're going to show up in New York and we're going to do it. Right, we ended up in public housing. I went to public school. I shout out to Forest Houses. That's where I grew up. And that experience and that backdrop also in the context of the Bronx in the 80s and 90s,
Yeah.
right? Well, let's talk about Reaganism. Let's talk about, AIDS. Let's talk about everything that was transpiring on those streets with those gangs, etc. Right? Like,
Mhm.
that is the backdrop that I grew up in. And I also am white presenting, right? My family, however Black they are, however caramelo and brown and everything else in between they might be, I show up and this is who I am. And this is how people see me and receive me. And, I had to grow up in that context and find refuge on a couple of different levels because everyone wanted me, I was a chubby kid. You should be playing football, right? You should be playing basketball. But I was the gay boy that wanted to play double dutch with the Black girls on the other side of the park, right? Like, and that's where I found my happiness, right? And that was what I learned at a very early age is like, I don't need to necessarily do what I'm told or be pushed in this direction, right? But I also have to be willing to confront, that friction of trying to show up as my whole self. But it was really important for me just to be happy, right? Like, I just wanted to mind my business. I was, again, just this introverted kid trying to find his way. And yeah, that was me playing handball, playing double dutch, and hiding in the library.
Wow. It's interesting the reference of the library as well, because I think these days when people talk about like escaping life, if you will, to this other universe, a lot of talk is spoken about like the Web3 and like getting a
Mm,
VR headset. But I've got a bunch of friends that one of my best friends actually is a huge, he's really into books. Like he reads a book a week type of stuff, right?
hmm
And I've always been jealous of that because I'm not a big reader. I mean, thankfully now because of audio, I feel like I can experience the same things that he was going through, in the sense of like having a certain experience in life and then diving into someone else's story and
mm.
getting sort of like outside of your story, right? Um, so yeah, I love that you're into reading and that was your escape. I'm wondering for you growing up too, like what sort of books were you reading? What were you into? Um, yeah.
Wow. I was reading the Chronicles of Narnia like first, second grade. And the context for that is Spanish is my first language, right? So going
Mm.
into pre-K and into kindergarten, I had a thick accent. So, I was that chubby queer kid with the accent, getting picked on, etc. So I developed an anxiety about speaking English well and pronouncing my words the way Americanos would, right? And so I started, funny enough, training my ear using audio cassettes. So
Interesting.
my mom, one of the first things that she gave me when I was a young kid was a box set of Dr. Seuss books with tapes. And I would read them out loud and mimic, the white lady narrating over and over and over again until, I got to a place where I developed a confidence for speaking well. And I also developed a confidence for reading. And I started reading bigger books, longer words, more pages. And I started developing an appetite for really thick books and novels. So I was reading Tolkien by the third grade, right? And I ended up scoring really, really high on a state exam to the point where they questioned whether I cheated on the exam because I scored so high. It was a
Wow.
communications or like English exam or something like that. Yeah. And so, yeah, books were, um, again, my shield and my sword on many levels, right? And then helping to equip me with the things that I needed to, in many ways, adapt and assimilate, right? Like we can go there and we can have that conversation. I was trying to find ways of connecting with people through common ground along the way, shifting, and adapting new aspects of my identity in that regard.
Tell me a little bit more about that, because some people read books to your point, like escapes, and people use it to learn. For me, like I didn't really enjoy reading books until I started reading Diaz. And for me, the reason why I enjoyed it, because I always felt like I had to carry a dictionary when I was reading books. But that was the first time where I was like, oh shit, this is relatable. Like it was the first time where I saw yo in a book, and I was like, oh shit. You know what I mean? And I felt seen and heard for the first time. But for you, it sounds like reading and books was so much more than just feeling seen. Like you said, it helped you assimilate.
Yeah, absolutely. Like my parents still speak English with a thick accent, right? They don't speak English with as much fluency as I do. And I had to figure out ways of succeeding at school, right? Like, because that was the thing that was also ingrained in me at a young age. I am the firstborn of the first generation on my mom's side of the family, second on my dad's side of the family, that didn't grow up in La Finca, right? I wasn't cultivating the land. I wasn't picking plátanos and coffee and things that the rest of my family did to make a living. And so it was ingrained in me. You make a living either using your head or your hands. You choose. And so, I saw like, the more books I read, the better my English, the more I learn, the more conversation I can have, the more relatable I am, the more, favoritism I get from the teachers, right? Because education was ingrained in me as the path out of the situation that we were in.
Yeah. And then you start acing these exams. I'm sure people start telling you, oh my God, you're so well spoken. But it's interesting, like in some ways, I'm sure some of those compliments were good to hear. I'm assuming, right? Because you worked so hard to quote unquote get rid of that like thick accent and sound more American and sound educated and all these things, right? So when you started getting some of those accolades, how did that feel?
Double-edged sword. I feel like the more I have worked on preparing myself for success in American corporate setting, the more distant I've become culturally from the places where I was born and grew up, right? I'm presently in Northern California, and now the world has shifted and changed, but when I entered the tech world, you had to be here to get in and fit in. And that meant being in the context of California, very distant from the Puerto Rican, Dominican, West Indian, West African communities that I grew up in, right? I can't get my oxtail on demand here, right? I'm lucky if I can find green plátanos when I go to the market. They're all machucado by the time I get there, right? Like, and forget it. When I have a craving for pasteles, like finding the plátano leaves and the papers and the things that I need to roll them up, also a challenge, right? Yeah. When I walk down these streets, I don't hear salsa. I don't hear house. I don't hear reggaeton, right? Those are the contributions of my people and my ancestors, but you wouldn't know that in California. And so I show up in this place where, in order to thrive and be in a position to provide for the family, to send money back to Puerto Rico after every hurricane and earthquake and everything else that comes up, right? I need to be here moving and shaking and hobnobbing with people that are very different than me, don't have the context for how I grew up or where I grew up. And in many ways, I have to find ways of influencing them and getting them to see me as just another relatable human being who is just out here trying to thrive, right? That I have to find ways of finding that common denominator with people.
Tell me about how you found some of those ways to find a common denominator. I'm assuming all of those books you read helped you out, but in what other ways or situations have you been in where you were like, oh, I'm not relatable, but I need to be relatable, and then just the thought process around how you do it?
Yeah, I think earlier in my career, when I just wanted to come up and be respected, I would, give into, oh, your favorite Justin Bieber song is this? Oh, that's cool. I like this other song he did with someone else. Oh, by the way, have you heard of Bad Bunny? Have you heard of Mark Anthony? Do you know La India? Like, let me put you onto something new.
Oh,
right? Like,
La India is top 3 for me.
Of course.
She
Legend.
She like speaks to my soul.
Yeah. she's out here. She's out here for us. So, part of it is like, yeah, you have to kind of like find a common denominator, get that interest, get that person's ear, and then start to be yourself. And I've reached a point in my life and in my career where I don't filter that anymore. I actually don't care to fit in. I don't care if you get me, right? Because at the end of the day, it isn't about who's right, it's about what's right when we're doing business. Look at these numbers and look at everything else that I'm running. You don't need to understand that I'm bilingual. You don't need to understand the complexities of my gay identity in order to understand that there's money on the table, right? That's the first thing that I pointed the attention to.
Yeah.
Then I look at all the ways that my perspective can influence conversations. I'll mention the elephant in the room. I'll bring up the consideration that hasn't been considered. I call out when there are Indigenous or Black people in the room making decisions that they should be involved in, right? With no concern about being fired or othered or anything else, because I've had so many experiences where I did the assimilation thing. I was the good boy. I was the good Latin boy. I was the good Latin gay boy. I was the good diversity hire. I was whatever you needed me to be, because I was so grateful for the opportunity and the seat at the table. And you still came after me. Yeah. You still threw daggers at my back. You still pulled the rug from under my feet. You still disrespected me. And so now you're going to look at my numbers and you're going to hear what I have to say. And you're going to decide in 2022 if you pick up what I put down or not, because I'm going to continue moving in this direction. I know what excellence is, and it looks a lot more like you and I in this conversation than the other interactions that I've had. And so I've reached a point of being unapologetically authentic.
Yo, that is exactly what happened to me. I was like, yo, I'm wasting so much time doing research on like literally developing like scripts, almost like plays, if you will. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna say this, they're gonna respond that. I'm gonna take this conversation that way. And like, I was like, yo, all this work that I'm doing, I'm still getting hit with the disrespect. Why? Yeah. Like, if I'm gonna get hit with the disrespect, at least let me be myself with it.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about some of those disrespectful and, just conflicting moments where even with you assimilating, you were still getting hit with what some people would say microaggressions or racism or whatever that conflict was with that professionalism versus authenticity.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't so micro at times, but let's set the context.
It wasn't so micro.
It wasn't so micro. I mean, it was in my face. It was in everyone's face. It was toxic as fuck. So context, out of school, first generation, first to go to college, first to graduate high school, like first to like get a high school diploma in my household, right? Wow. So of course, the anxiety of like, ooh, I gotta be a doctor or a lawyer or a business person if I'm gonna make it out here, right? So I started college, I was on that whole pre-med tip, bored out of my mind, sitting in these labs. I was like, I'm done. I see everybody out in the quad, jumping around, rolling around. I'm like, I want that college experience. You know what I mean? Like, let's switch up this major. So then I went from doing the pre-med thing to doing the pre-law thing. And I got out of college and I worked in a nonprofit as a paralegal. And then I worked as an assistant to the Honorable Margarita Lopez Torres. She was the first Latina, first woman elected to the bench in surrogates court in Brooklyn. Wow. In Kings County. It was such an honor to serve her all the years that I did. And during that time, I started law school part-time. Wow. Ooh, I was bored out of my mind.
And you did and you did this because you thought that's what your family wanted?
Well, I thought that's what it meant to be successful. Doctor, didn't like it. Lawyer, yeah, I got a mouth on me. I could definitely, I could definitely argue for, and speak on somebody's behalf, my own behalf when I need to, right? I'm also definitely good with the words. I can read and synthesize information very quickly. I can certainly write and produce decrees quickly too, right? And for me, it was a matter of, I was a sociology major in college, and for me it was a matter of applying my education to give back, right? I think that's the other thing that's really ingrained in us, whether it's being growing up in poverty, growing up in New York, being Caribeño, whatever it is, we don't move up without bringing people with us, right? And for me, it was a matter of like trying to find a place where I could utilize the privilege that I've acquired and amassed, getting an education and applying that education to serve. I I burned out in that process. I was unhappy, and also the reality of being first generation when there are hurricanes and earthquakes and all kinds of things impacting your family is, oh, I couldn't live on a nonprofit salary. I couldn't live on a government salary and pay off these loans and be a provider. And also
Mm-hmm.
somehow in that mix, try to have a life for myself, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm cute and single. I'm out in New York. I want my own place. I want to bring the cuties back.
Hey.
You know what I mean? You need cash flow to live that kind of life in New York.
Facts.
And the reality is that the work that I was doing was not sustainable. I was also surrounded by, lots of white women married to affluent men who could do that work because they had a partner working with them in tandem. And so
Yeah.
when I had that veil lifted of like, oh, I'm out here by myself and I have nothing to like really hang on to so I can like really do this work in a meaningful way. I don't got the man, I don't got the trust fund, I don't got the nothing to fall back on. It was time to pivot. So not the doctor, not the lawyer. Could I be the business person? And that's when someone approached me, one of my best friends. She was working in the marketing department at WebMD. She's like, you don't know it, but you got that gift.
Mm-hmm.
You can just step into a room and command it. I wonder if sales might be the path for you. And I know it's at odds with like your whole campaign to try to save the world, but you got to put your mask on first when the plane is going down.
Oof.
That was real.
Yeah.
That was real. Very like I think that there is a real sense of responsibility to our communities and our families, but we also have to recognize, especially being first gen and blazing a trail, whatever that might look like for your own lived experience,
Mm-hmm.
you got to be in a good place to take good care of yourself,
Yeah.
or you're not going to make it. You're not going to do anything for nobody. You're not going to be ready for that hurricane or whatever else comes down the line.
Yeah. And a lot of that is I mean, I don't want to say like it's not all about money, but financial security helps with the decisions that you make for you and your family. So,
Yeah.
sales careers in the sales path is a well-paid path, especially depending on the company that you work at. Like
Yeah.
you could be really secure financially.
Yeah, listen, we talked about trying to be the doctor and the lawyer and the business person. Now I go on dates with doctors and lawyers. I'm like, ooh, my check is looking cuter than yours, and you're the one with the Harvard MBA. What's up? Right? You just kind of have to in the process, right? I think there's leaning on the theme of authenticity. You got to be real about what you're up against. You got to be real about what your capacity is. And you also have to be real about like what it is that drives you. And at the end of the day, I was always driven by my connection, my capacity to connect with people, right? I am an introvert and I do, need to recharge and I get tired. I get tired, especially after conferences and things like that. Like I need to like sit in the room and have a quiet meal to myself and then get back into the vibe, right? But I still am fueled by connecting with people and helping people and seeing aha moments and bringing, different connectors together, right? And I had to figure that space out. So I welcome this advice of maybe you should explore sales. I went in, I knew nothing about advertising sales. I knew nothing about tech or software or corporate for that matter. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. 8 interviews later, they offered me a job. And I started on the sales support side of the whole experience, helping the account
Mhm.
executive look real cute. And then when I got tired of the account executive making all the money for all the work that I was doing, I eventually moved up in ranks and became an account executive myself while I was working at the BBC. They had
Mhm.
just opened their North American headquarters, and I was one of the OGs on that sales team. And so that was the context for before I got to Silicon Valley. I'm working in advertising sales in New York. Talk about hypermasculine, sexist, misogynistic, racist, homophobic. Like I had bosses that today would not have jobs, right? Like, and in the context of everything going on in this world now, they would definitely not have gotten away with it. And as much as I reported, spoke up, spoke out, spoke against these things, I was all the way disrespected and diminished. And so the value proposition, right, of making that jump to the West Coast, show up in Silicon Valley was you had companies like LinkedIn and Google, places that I've had the privilege of working. I was recruited to these companies after showing up. The promise was I could be my whole self. I could be the Puerto Rican, I can be the boy from the Bronx, I could be the gay boy, I could be left-handed, I could be chubby, bearded, whoever I was, because what was the focus or the promise was my contribution. And in fact, they wanted me to be my whole self so that I could influence the design of products and customer experiences so that people who come from my backgrounds could also have good experiences.
And
That promise was not fulfilled.
that was going to be my question. It was going to be, was that promise fulfilled? And that resonates with me a ton, because that's why I wanted to work for those big tech companies, was for that same reason. And I think your experience in particular is interesting, because you not only have to deal with your coworkers and what that promise is with your coworkers, but they want you to be your authentic self at all times, right? You're in sales. You have to be authentic with your clients, supposedly,
Ooh.
right? So when you say that that promise wasn't fulfilled, tell me about that experience.
Wow, gosh, on so many levels. First of all, I'm working with leaders who have never engaged with people at as intersectional as I am, right? They don't get why it's such a big deal that me being a first generation gay Puerto Rican from the South Bronx is monumental, right? For me to like have that seat at the table and that kind of influence. They don't know how to relate and connect with me, right? So I had to do the code switching. Oh, you like Journey? Yeah, I like that song too. It's one of my karaoke jams. Yeah, sure. Right.
Oh my God, we can have a whole episode on karaoke
Oh,
nights.
oh, child. Oh, I feel like I avoid them now. Okay, like that.
Yeah.
I avoid them now. But it was, I had to, find ways of navigating and connecting with people who didn't quite get me, and at every turn, found me to be the difficult one,
Is
because
that something that you were told, or is that something you
all the
just assumed
time.
that you were difficult?
Oh yeah, I was definitely reminded and told outright that I was too forward, I was too direct in my communication. I could tone it down a bit. My shirt was a bit too loud for that meeting.
Your shirt?
Oh yeah, apparently pink is too loud of a color in some settings, even though it's a naturally occurring color in nature.
Interesting.
Right. And, so that was the experience of being an executive in these settings, was depending on who I was reporting to, whether they had the cultural intelligence to manage people that were different than them or not, determined the quality of my experience in the organization. But then you brought up the matter of customers, right? And I worked with, many Fortune 500 C-level executives who also were not culturally intelligent. And so they could never pronounce my four-letter name. I was Louis, I was Louis, but I was never Luis.
Mm.
And if I insisted on being called Luis, if I reminded people that my name is Luis, I'm hard to work with. I'm adding too much friction to the relationship. Oh, and you're gay. Can we have another rep?
Customers have literally told you, or like
Yeah.
told your manager, let's have another rep?
They've told me to my face, they've told managers, right? And then that creates all kinds of red flags and all kinds of things, because let's contextualize this, right? I'm having these experiences, I'm entering the tech sector. The year was 2012, right? This boom is happening, and this is around the time that all these big companies were starting to disclose what their numbers were behind closed doors relative to their diversity, equity, and inclusion metrics.
Mhm.
And that's when everyone came to terms with, oh, y'all don't hire or proactively look for indigenous people, Black people, gay people, queer people to work for you, right? And that was the moment of reckoning for the industry.
I'm
But the solutions weren't quite there, right? The support systems weren't there. Everyone wanted to have these excellent and successful case studies to demonstrate to their HR leaders. Oh, look at these are the channels that we explored for talent acquisition. This is the effectiveness and role in the first 90 days. This is participation in employer resource groups and all of these things, right? But when I come to the table and I say, oh, I've got a customer requesting another executive because they have a problem with me being gay, that interrupts the progress and the momentum behind all of these metrics that they're trying to deliver about, oh, look at how much better we're doing. right? How do we solve for showing investors that we're doing good while also trying to put out this fire internally so it doesn't get out of control?
Wow.
It's real.
Tell me more about that experience, but more so from your standpoint. I'm curious, in that situation, I think, at least going through my head, I would have a few different scenarios that I can do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even in, so there's even in the name example, right? In that scenario, you could have said, "Oh, Louis, ha ha ha, yeah, you can call me Louis," and I've done that before.
Mm-hmm.
I've gone through, yes, you can call me Louis for maybe 10 times. And maybe on
Yeah.
the 11th time, it took me, I was like, no, you know what? It's Pavel or it's Pavel, right? Whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
right? Talk to me about the first time where you were just like, no, you know what? That's fine. Yeah, call me Louis. And then when did you get the confidence to be like, no, I want a seat on that swing set? Came in there
Yeah.
with your broom, let's call it, but not
Yeah.
literally, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. For me, it was when I got my account executive title. That's when no one got away with mispronouncing my name, right? At that point in my career, yo me había comido y tragado toda la mierda of like doing all the work for other people to shine. And now I had the title and I earned it. So this is my name. My name is Luis. And now that I have this title, I will always be an executive. I will always make this money, right? And so now I don't have to worry about ruffling feathers and looking like the good little gay Latin boy who's super eager and super hungry for his shot, because I got my shot and I got my title. Y hasta aquí llego yo with the disrespect.
It's kind of like a validation, and the validation helped you let go of some fear of like, yo,
Yeah,
if I get fired, like I'm an account executive, I could get another
right.
job as an account
Honey,
executive.
I'm gonna make this money anywhere else, right? Like that's just the thing. It's like when you, especially in sales,
Yeah.
right? When you reach a certain level, you just don't come back down. And I
Mm-hmm.
was very aware of the kind of income and the kind of influence and the kind of pull that having an executive title would give you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And at that point, I had power in my career, in my title, right? And that's when I stopped bowing down and being the good little boy.
Yeah.
Because at that point, my job was to be the hunter, right? I had to
Mm-hmm.
be the capitalist, the aggressor. I had numbers to hit, targets to hit. Whether you liked pronouncing my name or not, we got work to do because you have a boss to answer to, and so do I.
Yeah. No, 100%. And it's it's unfortunate too, because even talking about some of those experiences, like I have had guests on the podcast say that, well, they said that they self-identify as queer, but going
Mhm.
into corporate spaces, they didn't receive the same comment that you got, whereas like, I don't want to work with this person but because
Mm.
they're queer. Before they even get that comment, what they have done is they said that um they hide their feminine side visibly.
Yeah.
So they choose to, and this has been examples, they, they choose to show a more traditional masculine representation of what a
Yep.
quote unquote man is supposed to look like, right? So um so that they don't receive some of that feedback, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious, for you, in some of those instances, did you ever think, quote unquote, let me tone it down, or let me be a little bit more quote unquote masculine presenting, so that, because although you're account executive, there has to be some fear
Of
in there,
course.
right? Like, not only are you an account executive, but you work for like a tech company that everyone wants to be at.
Yeah.
What were some of those emotions and anxieties that were going through your head at that time?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. As you're asking this question, I'm actually trying to think back, like, was there ever a time where I wasn't cognizant about the way that I was presenting relative to
Mm,
masculinity?
yeah.
The answer is no. Because, like, let's take
Mm,
it all the way back, like trying to be in the P's, trying to survive, this like hyper masculine world. I had to tone it down in some instances because literally my life depended on it,
yeah.
right? And earlier in my career, before I had the titles that commanded the kind of money and respect that I had to tone it down, right? I had to
Yeah.
find a way of assimilating and fitting in and being relatable and being liked, so that people looked at me and considered me for that promotion. Oh, he is, you know, relatable enough to put in front of customers. he's obedient enough to trust him, right? And that's the reality of getting in the game, right? And I had to figure out how to negotiate that outside of my corporate life, right? On weekends, I'm Luis, I'm Luisito, I'm Osito, I'm out at the boy bars, and if I feel like femming it up, then so be it, because that's my mood and that's my vibe. And this is my space to be safe. This is my family, my tribe, right? I don't need to code switch for your ass. You're in my sandbox now.
Yeah.
Right. Now that I'm further up in my career, now that I'm in the global sort of position in my career, now it's like, listen, I have to bring all aspects of my intersectionality to what I do, because it's how I now gain credibility influencing teams around the world.
Yeah.
Right. So when I talk about my ancestry hailing from 3 different continents and intersecting in the Caribbean, and when I then, contextualize growing up on an island versus growing up in the concrete jungle, right? And then doing the bi-coastal thing and then traveling the world, right? This is now my credibility. Yeah. Whereas before, it was my perceived disability, if you will, or handicap in the process of trying to thrive in, the kind of structures that we're up against.
Yeah, that the word you said that literally gave me goosebumps is enough. It's kind of like he's tolerable, he's yeah. I hear that often and it's so unfortunate, but it makes sense though. Your story around you've felt like you had to tone it down for so long, whereas like now I'm done toning it down.
Yeah.
And I'm sure maybe this is just me making up a story in my head, but I'm sure that because of the authentic and unapologetic person that you have become, I'm assuming that people feel comfortable being themselves because you feel comfortable being yourself, right? Like
it's so much more productive.
And I'm assuming in some way, like people DM you or message you on the side, it was like, you gave me permission to be myself. Like, do you get some of that feedback?
I do. And I have to say, I used to really shy away when people would give me that kind of feedback, right? Because like, I'm just doing what needs to be done, right? And I'm also just out here trying to survive. And survival has been my MO all those years and still is, right? And now I get that feedback. And for me, I embrace them as like these gentle reminders to continue to do this work and to continue to speak up and to continue to show up the way that I do. Because to your point, I see people around me now thriving and having more confidence and speaking more directly and saying what needs to be said in meetings for customers, etc., when I do the same. Right. So I set the tone and other people lean into that. And for me, I also have to take a step back and kind of recognize like, coño, like hemos llegado, like, for a very long time, I always wanted a leader that did X, Y, or Z. And now I am that leader doing X, Y, and Z and creating the kind of environment around me where everyone else can thrive. And my hope as I continue down this path is to influence more and more people, to bring that heat, bring that sazon, bring that flavor, because we need it. Yes. Oh, these meetings are boring otherwise, child. Like I need you. I need you bringing it for real.
100%. I say like, I always say like I try to become I'm trying to become the representation that I wish I had when I was younger. You know what I mean? Yes. So that again, it's all about that permission, because that visual representation is important because it gives us that like, oh, if they're doing it, I could do it. So to wrap up the conversation, we'd love to ask you this final question. Like, what's one thing that continues to inspire and empower you to continue being your most authentic self?
I've realized, and this is going to sound arrogant, but it's just, I've realized my own power and my own divinity and my own capacity. And now when I think about what's next, it's all about amplification, right? This world needs more Pavel and Luis's in rank. What does that look like? How does it come together? We're not here with, the 30 slide deck on that, right? That's not what this is about. But that's where this is where I'm I'm headed. This is the work that I'll be doing moving forward in my career. It is no longer about me because I secured the bag. I flew around the world first class. I saw all the pretty things. I had all the nice meals. I loved all the most beautiful men around this world. Like, I have done me, right? My family is safe, right? We have what we need. Y ahora qué más? Because where I started my journey was trying to figure out how to apply my privilege to get more privilege for other people. And I've not lost sight of that. And now I've reached a point where I'm good. I got what I wanted. You know, los biles se pagaron. And now I need to think about more than just myself. That is the call to action for me.